Hello YouTube, this is Alexander speaking, and we are right in the middle of Moscow, just 100 meters away from the Kremlin. We are in front of the oldest embassy in Moscow. Of course now it's a museum, the old English court, but it used to be, odd as it may sound, but the first embassy ever in Russia was British one. How many other British places in Moscow do we have? So we'll see on the way. Let's go. You will ask me how it happened that we have so many British places in Moscow and why the first embassy in Moscow is the British one. Because London and Moscow are quite far away from each other and we have big Europe in between. But it happened so that in the middle of the 16th century, Britain was isolated, Russia was isolated as well, and Tsar of Russia, Ivan the Terrible, seeking for allies. And Britain was seeking for allies as well. And Britain at the same time sent 3 ships to India. But the southern way was closed for Britain by the Spanish armade, by the Portuguese, and the geography at that time was not so well known. At that time it seemed to Britain that if we go to the north and we go around Eurasia, this way or other we'll find the northern way to India. You know, they were very much mistaken because Russia is vast, and they lately found themselves in Arkhangelsk, where they were captured and then sent to Moscow. And this was the lucky ending for them, because Russian Tsar Ivan the Terrible was, as I said, looking for allies, and this is how Moscow Trade Company started. It was founded in London. Still we have Muscovy Road in London, we have Onega Gate, named after Lake Onega in the north of Russia, and Muscovy Road, where the first Moscow embassy, Russian embassy, was in London. And the first embassy in Russia ever is still just here, next to the Kremlin. Strange enough, but another British, the most British place in Moscow is the Kremlin. How it happened? Because when the Kremlin was reconstructed, spires were added to the Kremlin, because originally the towers were absolutely flat like Italian towers, and when spires were added, this was made by several Russian architects, and one of them has a strange name of how it was spelled in Russian, Christopher Galovey. Of course he was Christopher Galloway from Scotland. He also made not only spires but the first ever clock in the main tower of Russian Kremlin, but the first clock was and looked not the same as it looks now, because now we have the face and hands going just clockwise, and at that time it was vice versa. It was only one hand which was stable, and it was the face that was rotating. And as one British ambassador said, it's because time in Russia goes not as everywhere in Europe, that's why they need their own clock. As we're going to another British place of Moscow, another tidbit of information. The mere founding of Moscow is a British problem, a British issue. Which, how and why? Because in every Russian school book it is said that the founder of Moscow is Yuri Delgarocki, and his father is Vladimir Monomach, the Prince of Kiev, but nobody, literally nobody knows who was his mother. Because allegedly his mother was second wife of Prince Vladimir, and she, odd as it may sound, but she was a purely British princess, because she was Gita of Wessex, who fled from Britain after the Battle of Hastings, when her father, King Harold, was killed. He was killed in action, and his daughter fled to continental Europe. Then she was moved to Russia and married a prince from Kiev. And one version is that she gave birth to the founder of Moscow. We have a monument to Yuri Delgarocki right in the middle of Moscow, and thus we can say that we have a monument to allegedly half-blooded English prince. And here we are again, right in the center of Moscow, with this strangely looking building, just Moscow, but very common for any small British town. This is Anglican Church of the 19th century, which was built in late 19th century, in 1880s to be exact, and it was built by some architect, Neil Freeman from Manchester. Nobody knows whether Neil Freeman arrived here himself or he just sold his project to Russia. But anyway, by the 19th century there was a huge British community in Moscow. Since the 16th century it only grew with merchants, with different people who came to Russia for better life, and a small house for prayers was not enough here, and that's why they decided to construct something very tremendous. They were allowed to do so, but with the only one exception. They were not allowed to put bells inside, because only Russian Orthodox churches were allowed to ring bells in Moscow in the 19th century. 10 years later, another building was added here. Again, pure Victorian Gothic, which was constructed by the McGill's family, and there is even a sign here saying in English, just in the center of Moscow, saying in English that this building was constructed to commemorate the memory of late Sir McGill. And the McGills were a wealthy family living in Moscow and having a lot of houses, lands, enterprises here in Moscow, and they lived here just even before the revolution of 1917. Of course, during Soviet time this building was nationalized, and it was not a place for prayers, and it was not even a church. It was a musical studio, and all famous Soviet songs, they were recorded here, because this building has a unique acoustics. Nowadays the building was returned to the Anglican Church, and now it's a working church here in the middle of Moscow. Another good coincidence here is that we have St. George Cross, and at the same time St. George is not only a patron saint of England, it is also a patron saint of Moscow. And he's even depicted in the coat of arms of Moscow. And again we have St. Andrew Cross here, who is of course patron saint of Scotland, but at the same time he's a patron saint of Russian Navy. History is a very tricky thing and full of coincidences. Another British place in Moscow is the famous Bolshoi Theatre. How come? It all started in the late 18th century, when the Empress of Russia, Catherine the Great, allowed to make theaters in Moscow and in Russia in general. And at that time, Michael Maddox arrived to Moscow and organized a big theater, literally big theater, because the Bolshoi means big, just literally, still in Russian language it means big. And at that time it was a big theater indeed, because it hosted 800 people at the end of the 18th century, and was one of the biggest buildings in Moscow at that time in general. That's why the name. And as I said, it was all founded by a British guy named Michael Maddox. But Michael Maddox was not only involved in the Bolshoi Theatre, he was also involved in the so-called Vauxhall, a pleasure garden on the outskirts of Moscow, which was called Vauxhall, just to repeat the success of the same pleasure garden in London at that time in the 19th century. And still the name Vauxhall is widely used in Russian language, but it doesn't mean a garden. it means a railway station, a big terminal in any Russian city. Why is that? Because also at the end of the 19th century, Russian engineers arrived to London to see what they have there, to share experience in construction of railroads, and they were shown a station next to Vauxhall. And when they read Vauxhall in English, they thought that it's not the name of the district, but it's the name of the function of the building. And that's why they took that from English language into Russian. And still, every Russian big city has a Vauxhall. We don't need to go far away from here to see another British place in Moscow, which is the so-called TSUM. Of course, it's a Soviet acronym for Central Universal Shop, which is still used, but just traditionally. But it was founded before the revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, and its owners were from Britain, actually from Scotland. They were Andrew Muir and Archibald Merrilees, and they founded the most luxurious shop in Moscow, and which is still one of the most expensive ones. Built then in a very Gothic style, and we can see its advertising in any Moscow newspaper printed before the revolution at the beginning of the 20th century. And again here, next to the Bolshoi Theatre, we have another building connected with Britain, because it was built by two architects. One of them is Lev Kekushev, and another one is William Walcott. William Walcott was very successful in Russia. He constructed a lot of very luxurious buildings, mansions, but in 1908 he left Russia for Britain and was not so successful in London. But there is one building in St. James Street which was constructed by William Walcott, and you can still see it. And finally, last but not least, we call Russian underground and Moscow underground in general metro. Why metro? Because in the 19th century, when the first underground system was opened in London, in Russian language it was called metro or metropolitan, because it was written there somewhere in London, Metropolitan Railway. This was the name of one of the companies which was involved in construction of London Tube. And this word was taken into Russian language, and when only in 1930s the first metro in Soviet Union, in Moscow to be particular, was constructed, it was of course called Metropolitan, or Metro as we call it nowadays in Russia. And that's all. Thank you for watching. Like this video if you like this video. Do not subscribe because the channel is in Russian and this is an experiment. But if you ever come to Moscow, you know whom to address and whom to call as a guide. Thank you, and stay safe and carry on.